Right, our final topic of episode 5 already. Fans Pulse Lap 4. I'll put the graphic on. I will remember to put the graphic on screen. Okay, you have voted. We're going to talk about refereeing standards in Speedway. So, we talked about unsung heroes earlier. Some referees were accredited as being unsung heroes because they do tend to put their heads above the parapet. And we're thankful that they do. Without referees, we couldn't administer and run Speedway meetings. However, on the flip side, referees come in for a lot of critique. Like referees in any other sport, I would suggest, and I just wonder, gents. You know, I won't lead you in terms of some of my own thoughts. I'll share these as we go. But we all know referees. We're all friendly with some more than others, I would imagine, over the course. But what would you say, Stuart Robson? I'll bring you in first. You know, refereeing standards in Speedway in particular, high, medium, and low. What would you say, Stuart?
A lot of the time they could do with being a bit more consistent. That's one thing. I haven't been to many meetings of late over the last couple of years. Really, I've been to a few, and refereeing's been quite fine, to be honest. But I have seen in the past when I've been involved, there's so much inconsistency with different referees. Like on the first bend bunching rule and things. I remember once I got excluded on. It was around at Somerset actually, and we went from the start. I didn't even make it into the first bend before I got run into and was knocked off, and I got excluded for it. And you know it was a purely first bend thing. Everyone's going for the same point of the track at that part of the race, you know, and you know that was I got excluded for it. There was nothing I could do about it, and that was that. I think any other referee or most of the referees would have just put it down to the first bend and all fall back. But yeah, that particular time it didn't. But yeah, I mean, there's everyone knows who the good referees are and I can't say bad referees. There's no one bad referee, otherwise there wouldn't be a referee. Whether it's more controversial or just they're a bit more they think differently. I don't really know. Maybe they see things differently. But people know who they are, and they know when they turn up, the meeting might run differently.
Interesting, Stuart. You're right. I think generally referees tend to get it right mostly, and lots of meetings go without too much controversy. Nigel, you're welcome to reminisce, Nigel, if you choose. But I just wondered. My question to you, Nigel, is where we think that referees get it wrong. Does it tend to be the same recurring errors in your view, or is it a variety?
I'd have to agree exactly with what Stuart says. I think possibly the refereeing today isn't so bad. It would be a referee anyway, because you're always going to be wrong with somebody, aren't you? I think in my time there were some bad referees, despite what Stuart might say. There were some bad referees, I believe anyway. And you hit the nail on the head when you said some are friendly with others more than others. You've hit the nail on the head with it. I won't name names, but they can't win sometimes, can they? I mean, to my mind, a referee is a man that turns up in that stadium, referees the meeting, and nobody knows he's there. And one in particular that was very, very good. I liked him anyway. Dave Dowling, unfortunately, Davey's not with us anymore. And I can remember on a wet meeting or two, Dave had come down on the track and whoever was having a moan about, oh, it's too wet. Dave Dowling, he'd walk down onto that track, look at it, right, we're racing. End of. No arguments, not, this might happen, that might happen. What happens if it's wet and he slides off and gets hurt? None of that rubbish, because you can get hurt on a dry track, a wet track, whatever you like. And Dave used to say, it's on. And I think maybe riders years and years ago maybe had more respect for referees than there is nowadays. When a referee said, yeah, we were riding, and that was it. But some referees, I don't know, they could be swayed. But generally, I don't know. There's certainly one referee had it in for me and he got me. Cost me a fortune. And they'd be pleased to know I've said that. But, you know, don't laugh.
As long as you're not bitter, Nigel. Yeah.
You all know it is, though. You know, and I know why he had it in for me. I know. And he did me 2 or 3 times. I knew when he was at that meeting, I was in for a bad one. And every time it happened. Every time. Every single time. Until the last time. Then it never happened again after that. But that's another story. So we'll leave it at that.
But moving swiftly along, let me bring in Big Mac. Big Mac, you know, Nigel mentioned it there, you know, who would be a Speedway referee? It's an unenviable task at times, I would imagine. But is there anything that Speedway could introduce or do to give some support to the referee? So, for example, a couple of times I've seen floated the suggestion of having an assistant referee who might be out on the centre green and a bit closer to some of the incidents.
How can I follow Nigel? You know what I mean? One thing I'll say about the refereeing nowadays is that I think from when you look at what they get presented with now, you know, they've got video replays, they've got a camera at every corner of the track. You know, you look at the racing from 30 years ago and the refereeing back then was one decision. You know, there was no checking videos, there was no checking, you know, replays. And I agree, I think the refereeing standards back then were poorer. I think there was a lot of controversy back then. I agree with Nigel when he says that I think that certain referees had certain people that they looked after. And I think that was quite blatant in some matches. I had my run-ins back in the day with a couple of the referees. I mean, one referee that was actually became a good friend was Gus McLeod. Gus excluded me a couple of times when, believe it or not, James Greaves had actually knocked me off. Looking at back in videos, it was blatant, but it was decisions that went against you that I didn't agree with. And back then, you know, we confronted the referee, we went to the referee's box, and you know, the crowd loved it, and that's what the characters were doing back then in the Speedway. But I think nowadays for referees, I think it's certainly an easier task with the video replays. I really do.
Yeah, I suppose that's a new introduction to the sport. You know, even club without BSN being in the stadium, you know, a lot of clubs, the majority will have their own live stream, and I dare say they can hook up a monitor in the referee's box, which must be of assistance. What about views on, Robbo, any views on, and I'm going to ask this question not knowing whether it's a thing or not, but do referees or should referees be assessed?
I would imagine they are, aren't they? They do a sort of probationary period with a referee who's sort of been doing the job for a few years. I'm not sure if they do a full season or how long they do, but they certainly used to do a probationary period to get assessed doing that, and they had to, I don't know if they had to sort of pass certain things or what, I don't really know what it entailed, but I remember seeing referees there with trainee referees quite a lot back in my day. You know, they would have to go around and inspect the track, inspect the fence, check this out there, check the stands out, you know, and everything had to have a report on it, and then I guess that was all part of the assessment. So yeah, it's certainly a good thing that they should be assessed. And but like you said, like everyone said, who'd want to be a referee? I mean, it's probably, like the guys said there, it's probably a bit easy now with video replay. I didn't actually know they had that. That is one thing I was going to say that they should have. But back in the day, you had one opportunity, you know, and if you missed something, you had to ask your mate next to you, I guess, and say, what happened there? What was your opinion on that? And I imagine that happened, but it sometimes could probably become a bit biased because that person next to you would be the timekeeper or whatever, the home track, and yeah, they might say, well, yeah, it was a bit more his fault than it was his. You know, but
surely not, Stuart.
But it's a difficult job. And I certainly wouldn't like to do it myself. More so back in the day to now, that's for sure. You had one opportunity, one chance to get it right, and you're always going to be wrong in somebody's eyes, like as I said.
That's true. Nigel, it occurs to me that the rule book over the years may have got more and more complex, right? And occasionally, some referees through make a decision and then are persuaded that they've actually got it wrong, right? It becomes apparent sometimes, by exception, that referees sometimes don't always follow some changes that have been introduced to the rule book. But I just wonder, Nigel, if first bend bunching isn't a thing. Apparently, there is no rule in the rule book that says that someone must be disqualified as these days for a first bend melee. One thing that does irk me a little bit, sometimes, right in the middle of a race, riders could be, racing along the back straight side by side, elbows clash, handlebars touch, someone comes off, right? But the referee, it's mandated the referee's got to disqualify someone, or I believe it's mandated. But it's very, very difficult and very, very subjective to get that right. Who was the rider that was at fault on the far side of the stadium, furthest away from where the referee is sitting? And I just wonder whether there ought to be some ability to restart races in that sort of instance where it's almost impossible to pick the right answer.
And you see that many times, don't you? A rider gets excluded and you think, whose fault was it? It was probably neither of the faults, but I don't know. Where do you stop? Where do you stop with it all? I don't know. It's very awkward, isn't it? And like we've all said, who wants to be a referee? But yeah, it's very awkward if you're 2/3 of a way, 3/4 of a way through a race and two clash, which often happens, doesn't it? Often happens. Somebody comes down and really you've a job to pick out. As you've heard on the Grand Prix, you get Kelvin Tatum talking and he says, he thinks this bloke should be excluded. Then the referee excludes the other bloke. Well, Kelvin Tatum's got as good a view as anybody of it and as much experience as anybody. Kelvin thought it was that man. Referee thought it was that man. What do you do? What do you do? It's down to the referee on the night, and that's how it is. I don't know. There's no answer to it, is there? Where do you stop? And
it's a thankless task. And do you know what? I would kind of hate Speedway to go down the VAR route where the whole meeting's held up while a referee studies a videotape for half an hour. Stuart, let's do one round, final round to end today. Stuart, I wonder if you can recall perhaps the funniest moment involving a referee or a decision that you might have been involved in. Stewart McDonald, anything that springs to mind that amused you?
There was one that I said earlier on about Glasgow, Edinburgh. I'm off gate 2, James is off 1. I was Edinburgh, James was Glasgow. I made the start and James took my front wheel away. So Gus McLeod excluded me, and for anybody that doesn't know, my father was very much a Speedway fanatic. He was also very protective of his son on the Speedway tracks. So he came running out with David Harkis there, Neil McFarlane, and obviously I was absolutely raging with the decision. So I was actually coaxed, believe it or not, by Neil McFarlane to go and confront the referee. And at that time, the Sheffield Stadium was full, 2,500 fans. I'm traipsing across the track, going to throw my helmet in the box where Gus McLeod was, and he's I'm going to fine you this, I'm going to ban you, blah, blah, blah. And Neil McFarlane said, go and do what you need to do, I'll pay the fine. Now, back in those days, that was entertainment.
Yes.
And do you know what? See, after the meeting, I bought Gus a pint in the bar. Mm-hmm. Because it was all done and dusted. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Nigel would buy his favourite referee a pint in the bar, but I certainly bought Gus a pint, and it was a great night, a great experience. The fans loved it. I was buzzing. Throw your helmet at the referee's box, and that's one memory that will never leave me. Leave me.
What a lovely memory. Robbo, what about yourself? Any flirtations with referees that makes you laugh to this day?
None that I can think of about myself, but I mean, I've seen other entertaining things that's made me laugh. And when riders have gone up into the box, I remember one. I can't remember what the meeting was. It was a meeting at Sheffield, and I'm certain Sean Wilson had been excluded for something. You know, him and whoever it was having a ding dong battle as the guys on the TV call it. They were having a real battle, and Sean come off and got excluded, and he ran up to the referee's box, up through the bar, and you know, at Sheffield you got to literally run up through the bar, and to me that was entertaining. That was funny. The crowd loved it though. Like Stu just said, the crowd absolutely loved it. They were cheering, they were booing, they were shouting, chanting, all sorts. I thought it was hilarious. And I've known Sean for a long time, and I knew what his temper was like. And he had for a small guy, he had a very wild temper. It was hilarious.
Sean Wilson, yep. If you're out there watching, Sean, hope you're well. Nigel, what about you? Let's end on a funny and happy note, Nigel.
Well, I always remember my very early days. Scunthorpe, when they used to ride, I doubt any of you remember it, at Quibble Park. It was round the inside of a racing cycle track. And they used to ride on a Monday, did Scunthorpe. So on a Sunday, they'd ride at Newcastle and then back to Quibble Park on the Monday. And Scunthorpe was only a bit, I don't mean it wrong this in them days, but it was a two-bob bit outfit compared to Newcastle. And I don't mean it wrong by anybody, but the promoter at Scunthorpe was nothing like Ian Thomas at Newcastle. Anyhow, they'd turned up at Newcastle, and Brian Osborne he'd caused a bit of a fuss over something what were wrong, and the meeting got delayed for a short while, and Ian Thomas was absolutely raging. Oh, he was well annoyed anyway. Anyhow, he goes down to Scunthorpe on the Monday, and straight away Thomas gets his tape measure out, and the track ain't wide enough. It's not the legal width, isn't the track at Scunthorpe. Bearing in mind, Brian Larner, the other promoter at Newcastle, had hold of one end of the tape, and Ian Thomas had the other end. So we were 2 foot short before we even started measuring. But let me tell you, Thomas caused absolute ructions at Scunthorpe that night in payback. But that was Ian Thomas. He was an entertainer. Robbo said it. Sean Wilson, an entertainer. Stuart's just said it up in the box there with Gus. You know, entertainment. And that's what's wrong with Speedway. It's not just about 15 races or however many. It's entertainment.
Leave the supporters wanting more, Nigel. That's the secret, isn't it?
Well, you know, they go home talking about things, don't they? Yeah. They go home if they don't talk about one of the 15 races or anything. They'll talk about when somebody's been lamped, like coming in, and somebody's had got a thump on the side of their helmet, and there's been a bit of a hustle and bustle, and that's what they go home talking about. But unfortunately, it's not allowed to happen nowadays.
No. Bring back the drama and controversy. Well, 360 Speedsters, thank you for watching to the end of episode 5. I'm going to leave you with a little teaser. We have got another new member of the 360 Speedway team who hopefully will make his debut on next week's podcast, and he is known for his visits to referees' box. So that's all I'm going to say. He will be revealed probably next week ahead of his debut. If you do have any aspirations to become a Speedway referee, the Speedway Control Board are always looking for fresh talent. So feel free to get in touch with the Speedway Control Board. Anyway, that brings us to the end of episode 5. Gents, once again, thank you very much for your effort, your input, your good company all episode long. 360 Speedsters, please keep across all of our social media output. It would be great to get many more likes, many more comments on Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and the other one that I've forgotten, Instagram. And of course, do keep across all of our output in short form and long form on our YouTube channel. And tell all your friends, please share, spread the word about 360 Speedway and get involved. And hopefully one of you is going to be brave enough to send a voice note message via our dedicated WhatsApp 0333 772 4046. And on that note, enjoy your weekend, enjoy your Speedway. Hope to see you next week. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.